The night over the Hungarian plain possessed an unusual stillness, as if the very wind held its breath in anticipation of the approaching tempest. A veil of mist, ethereal and pale, drifted languidly above the Sejo River, cloaking the landscape in an uncertain, spectral glow. Within the Hungarian camp, torches flickered, their flames bending and swaying in the gentle, almost timid breeze. It was the evening of April 10th, 1241, a mere handful of hours before the Battle of Mohi, an event poised to irrevocably reshape the destiny of an entire kingdom. King Bela stood in solemn silence near the riverbank, his gaze sweeping across the dark expanse. Behind him, the dim silhouettes of tents dotted the landscape, filled with exhausted soldiers, weary knights, and hastily assembled levies, men who had marched for days with scant opportunity for rest. Although sleep was craved by many, few could truly find it. Whispers of the approaching Mongol armies, tales of their unmatched speed, ruthless efficiency, and unsettling tactics drifted amongst them like the harbingers of an oncoming nightmare, sowing seeds of fear deep within the hearts of Europe. For Bela, however, the fear carried a weight far heavier. He bore not only the burden of kingship, but also the dread of a man who had already witnessed the Mongols' terrifying capabilities firsthand. He had seen cities consumed by flames in the east and fortresses fall with shocking ease. And now, that very same unstoppable force was poised to invade the heart of his own kingdom. He had clung to the hope that diplomacy might buy them time, but that hope had proven to be as fragile as spun glass. Behind the king, the bridge spanning the Sejo stretched like a delicate thread, a precarious connection between survival and utter destruction. Guards stood watch, their senses strained, hearing only the gentle murmur of the river and the soft, almost comforting, stamping of horses in the night. Yet, beneath that veneer of calm, tension coiled tightly around every heart, a silent scream waiting to be unleashed. Deeper within the camp, an aging knight named Martin sat, meticulously sharpening his blade with slow, deliberate strokes. Each scrape of metal against the stone echoed faintly in the quiet, a somber rhythm in the stillness. Martin had fought in countless battles, but this night felt different, heavier, as if the very air bore the accumulated weight of centuries of conflict. Beside him, a young squire named Deans watched with unconcealed anxiety. "Sir," Deans whispered, his voice barely audible, "do you truly believe they will attack before dawn?" Martin paused, his movements ceasing. He looked up into the smoky torchlight, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of war and a quiet, unspoken fear that dwelled within. "They are Mongols," he answered softly, his voice laced with grim certainty. "They attack when the world is least prepared. Dawn, midnight, such things matter little to them. What matters is exploiting the moment of weakness." The boy swallowed hard, his throat constricting. "Are we prepared?" Martin's gaze drifted toward the river, where darkness pooled like spilled ink. "We are here," he said after a long, contemplative pause. Sometimes, that is all a soldier can claim. Across the river, veiled by the protective cloak of night, the Mongol army moved with chilling precision. While the Hungarians attempted to calm their frayed nerves, Subutai, the legendary general whose strategic brilliance had crushed empires, was already meticulously setting the stage for a flawless trap. Scouts slipped silently through the shadows, their movements as fluid and silent as the river itself. Engineers repaired their formidable siege weapons, their expertise honed by countless conquests. And on the far riverbank, the faint, muffled thud of hooves marked the quiet arrival of Batacon himself. He observed the Hungarian camp from a distance, his expression unreadable, giving nothing away. Where others saw only torches and tents, Bata perceived patterns, weak points, vulnerabilities, the perfect avenues through which fear could infiltrate and spread like a plague. The Mongols did not simply attack, they orchestrated chaos, elevating it to an art form. Hours crept by with agonizing slowness. The mist grew denser, thicker, more impenetrable. The moon dipped lower in the sky, its light waning. And then, just before dawn began to paint the horizon with its pale, tentative light, the first signal arrow soared silently into the sky. The moment the Mongols initiated their attack, the world seemed to exhale, a long, cold breath filled with dread and foreboding. The first Mongol signal arrow vanished into the fading night, a fleeting spark extinguished almost as soon as it appeared, but its meaning resonated across the battlefield long before any sound reached the Hungarian lines. Moments later, the stillness of the Sejo River was violently shattered by the rhythmic drumming of thousands of hooves. From behind the obscuring veil of fog, figures emerged, blurred and indistinct at first, then coalescing into distinct silhouettes of mounted archers advancing with terrifying speed. At the Hungarian bridgehead, the guards barely had time to react. A horn sounded, its mournful cry trembling to the cold air, a desperate warning. Torches flared as soldiers rushed to their assigned positions, a flurry of frantic activity. Some grabbed spears, their hands slick with sweat and fear. Others hurried to crank up the heavy counterweights of the trebuchets strategically positioned near the riverbank. No one yet grasped the full scale of the storm about to break upon them. The sheer magnitude of the Mongol onslaught. In the heart of the camp, Martin jolted upright at the sound of the horn, his senses instantly alert. Deans, already awake and consumed by nerves, stared into swirling mist, his eyes wide with apprehension. "It has begun," Martin murmured, his voice calm but firm, as he fastened his armor with slow, practiced motions. Despite his calm exterior, his heartbeat pounded like a war drum. "Stay close to me, no matter what happens." Across the field, King Balafor swiftly mounted his horse, his movements decisive. His commanders gathered around him, shouting conflicting reports, their voices laced with panic. Archers at the east. "No, the enemy is crossing the river. They're firing on the bridge." But Bela knew what frightened him most. The Mongols were far too disciplined to waste arrows in confusion. Whatever was happening at the bridge was merely a diversion, the opening act of a deeper, more intricate plan. As a first wave of Mongol arrows rained down, the Hungarian defenders crouched behind their wooden shields, seeking meager protection, the air filled with the menacing whistle of incoming shafts. A few men fell instantly, their bodies crumpling to the ground. Others winced as arrows clattered against their armor, the impact jarring. Yet to many, it seemed less like a full-scale assault and more like a probe, testing their defenses, drawing their attention toward the bridge, a subtle manipulation of focus. Then came a sound no soldier expected so early in the battle. Thunderous impacts echoing from the far side of the river, resonating through the ground itself. To the shock and dismay of the Hungarians, massive Mongol siege engines, brought silently under the cover of night, a testament to their logistical prowess, began hurling massive stones toward the bridge and the Hungarian encampment. What kind of army moves siege engines so quickly? Deans whispered in disbelief, his voice barely audible above the din of battle. "The kind that does not accept defeat," Martin replied grimly, his eyes narrowed. Yet even as the Hungarians braced for a frontal charge, something strange and unexpected occurred. The Mongol cavalry near the bridge began to pull back, their movements deliberate and controlled. Their arrows slowed, their formation shifted, angling away from the bridge as if in retreat. Cheers erupted among some of the Hungarian defenders, a premature celebration. They're withdrawing. We've held them off. But Martin felt the hair on the back of his neck rise, a primal warning. "No," he muttered, his voice low and urgent. "They want us to believe that." He was right. Across the river, concealed behind a dense grove of trees, Subutai watched with unwavering focus. His meticulously crafted trap was unfolding exactly as he'd intended, a testament to his strategic genius. While the Hungarians fixated their attention on the bridge, his engineers were completing their true masterpiece, a temporary pontoon crossing further downriver, skillfully concealed from the Hungarian guards by the pervasive fog. Even as the defenders celebrated their perceived victory, thousands of Mongol troops were already beginning to cross at this secret point, silent, disciplined, and utterly deadly. Back in the Hungarian camp, the rising sun finally pierced a thick mist, revealing a clearer view of the river. The first rays of light glinted off something unexpected, catching the eye. "What is that?" a soldier cried, pointing downstream with a trembling hand. At first, it appeared to be mere debris, floating aimlessly on the water. Then it moved, rows upon rows of Mongol cavalry climbing onto the riverbank, their forms solidifying. Chaos erupted within the Hungarian ranks. "They've flanked us. They're behind our lines. Form up. Form up." Bela's commanders scrambled to reorganize their forces, their voices frantic and overlapping. The king's horse reared nervously as he shouted orders to shift the cavalry to the southern side, attempting to counter the unexpected threat. He knew, with a sinking feeling, that they were now fighting a battle they had not prepared for, a battle in which the enemy dictated every rhythm, controlled every tempo. Martin and Deans joined a cluster of infantry, forming a defensive line near the center of the camp, their movements automatic. The ground vibrated beneath their feet long before the riders came fully into view, a growing tremor of dread. "Mongol heavy cavalry," Martin said softly, his voice betraying no fear. "Stay steady." The riders burst from the dissipating morning fog like specters from another world. Lamellar armor glinting menacingly in the sun, bows held at the ready, their horses powerful and swift. They encircled the Hungarian infantry in wide, sweeping arcs, firing volleys of arrows before darting away with uncanny speed. Each pass left several men on the ground, their bodies broken and still. Deans raised his shield just in time to deflect an arrow, the impact jarring his arm. His arm shook from force, the shield barely holding. "Sir, we cannot chase them, they're too fast." "That is their art," Martin answered, his voice calm despite the chaos. "They make us bleed without letting us touch them." Suddenly, a fresh wave of panic rippled to the Hungarian ranks. The Mongols at the bridge were advancing again, this time with renewed momentum, their movements relentless. Their initial retreat had been a carefully calculated ploy, and now they pushed hard, forcing defenders back step by step, inch by agonizing inch. 2 Mongol attacks, one at the bridge, one from the flank, and the Hungarians were caught between closing jaws, a vice tightening with each passing moment. Bela attempted to rally his knights for a countercharge, but even the bravest riders hesitated, their courage faltering. The terrain was cramped, choked with wagons and tents, an obstacle course of their own making. The Mongols, however, moved with supernatural coordination, as though the battlefield existed solely for them, a stage on which they performed a deadly ballet. Martin saw the situation with painful clarity, the grim reality of their predicament. "We are being surrounded," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Dean swallowed hard, his throat dry with fear. "Then what do we do?" "We endure," Martin replied, his gaze unwavering. "And we pray that someone finds a gap before the circle closes fully." But the Mongols had no intention of leaving a gap, no intention of allowing escape. Every moment tightened their encirclement. Every volley of arrows weakened the Hungarian lines, chipping away at their defenses. The sun rose higher in the sky, illuminating a battlefield that no longer resembled an army holding its ground, but a desperate mass struggling merely to survive, a scene of utter carnage. And in the shifting smoke, Subutai's forces prepared for the next phase, a pivotal moment that would determine whether the Hungarian army would break and shatter completely or endure against all odds. The encirclement tightened slowly at first, like a serpent measuring its prey, assessing its vulnerabilities, and then with abrupt, terrifying precision as the Mongol lines shifted into seamless arcs, forming an impenetrable barrier. Each movement was synchronized, a testament to their discipline and training, and each volley of arrows was timed with chilling accuracy. What the Hungarian soldiers saw was not merely an army. It was a mechanism, a machine of war built with a level of discipline and patience far beyond anything they had ever faced, a force of nature unleashed. Martin wiped dust and sweat from his brow, his movements weary. The air around him reeked of smoke and churned earth, a suffocating blend. Dean stood close, his shield trembling in his hand, a visible sign of his fear. Arrows protruded from the ground and from shields like quills on a wounded beast, a testament to the ferocity of the attack. Yet the Hungarian infantry still held, clinging to their positions, forming isolated pockets of resistance across the cramped battlefield. "Hold your shields high," Martin reminded softly, his voice steady even as chaos reigned around them. To the north, the Mongol siege engines continued their relentless bombardment, hurling massive stones toward the Hungarian command center. The ground shook with each devastating impact, sending shockwaves through the already unstable morale of the defenders, pushing them closer to the breaking point. Behind the infantry, terrified horses whinnied in fear, their instincts screaming at them to flee, and knights struggled to form coherent lines, caught between orders to advance and the primal instinct to survive, a conflict tearing them apart. King Balafor, though surrounded by loyal guards, felt the crushing weight of the trap, now fully revealed, a suffocating realization of his strategic miscalculations. His scouts had failed to detect Subutai's movements, a fatal oversight. His commanders were giving contradictory instructions, exacerbating confusion and chaos. And worst of all, his army, massive in size but utterly disorganized, was steadily losing ground against an enemy half its size, a humiliating defeat unfolding before his eyes. The Mongols did not push forward all at once, opting for a more methodical approach. Instead, they tightened the ring impulses, pressing, withdrawing, pressing again, forcing the Hungarians to constantly adjust, react, and reposition. Every adjustment cost them precious time, further depleting their reserves. Every hesitation allowed the enemy to step closer, solidifying their advantage. Suddenly, a horn sounded from the Mongol right flank, its sharp, piercing tone cutting to the dust-choked air like a blade, a signal that sent a chill down the spines of the Hungarian soldiers. Martin felt his stomach sink, a premonition of what was to come. The heavy cavalry is coming. From the curtain of smoke emerged a line of armored riders, distinct from the swift, elusive archers who had harassed them all morning. These warriors carried long lances, heavy maces, and shields painted with grim emblems, symbols of death and destruction. Their horses, thicker and more muscular, moved with deliberate menace, exuding power and control. The effect on the battlefield was immediate, a palpable shift in atmosphere. Hungarian infantry braced themselves, tightening their formations in anticipation of the coming storm. Knights tried to maneuver into position for a countercharge, though the cramped terrain made any organized movement nearly impossible, exacerbating the chaos. Deans looked at Martin, his face etched with fear. "Is this the final strike?" "Not yet," Martin replied, his voice grim. "They are testing where we break first, probing our weaknesses." The Mongol heavy cavalry advanced at a slow, deliberate trot, a stark contrast to the swift, evasive movements of the archers. When they came close enough, they split into two wings, encircling both sides of the Hungarian line, a maneuver designed to maximize impact. Arrows ceased to fly. A brief and unsettling silence descended for a heartbeat, the eye of the storm. Then the charge began. The sound was indescribable, an avalanche of hooves and steel crashing forward with unstoppable force. The impact shook the ground as the riders slammed into the Hungarian flank, a collision of immense power. Shields shattered, splintering under the force. Spears snapped like twigs. Men cried out in agony as Mongol lances pierced their defenses, tearing through flesh and bone. Martin and Deans watched in grim astonishment as entire pockets of soldiers collapsed under the sheer weight of the assault, their bodies strewn across the blood-soaked ground. Even those who managed to hold their ground were pushed back, their lines bending like branches in a storm, threatening to break completely. "Fall back 2 steps. Martin shouted, his voice clear and commanding, guiding his cluster of infantry away from the collapsing flank. "Stay together." The Mongols did not linger in melee, their strategy precise and efficient. After the initial devastating blow, they pulled back with the same discipline with which they had charged, leaving a trail of carnage in their wake. And immediately, as if on cue, the mounted archers surged forward, unleashing a hail of arrows into the disorganized Hungarian ranks, punishing their retreat. A cycle of destruction had begun. Heavy cavalry to break formation, archers to punish the retreat, then heavy cavalry again to strike the weakened lines. It was a relentless rhythm of death and destruction that the Hungarians could not match, a war machine grinding them down. Near the center of the camp, panicked soldiers rushed toward the wagons, hoping to regroup behind them, seeking a semblance of safety. But the wagons only created choke points, trapping men between wheels and shields, turning them into easy targets. Mongol arrows rained into confusion, thinning their numbers further, adding to the chaos. At the command tent, King Bela fought against the encroaching tide of fear and despair, struggling to maintain control. He turned to his generals, his voice strained with desperation. "We must break out. If we stay here, we die." His commanders exchanged anxious glances, their faces etched with doubt. Breaking out meant choosing a direction, but every direction seemed to hold Mongol troops, a maze of death. Still, they agreed that remaining trapped would doom the entire army, sealing their fate. A messenger darted toward the center, shouting between breaths, "The east side is thinner. A gap may be a gap." Bela seized a chance, clinging to this last thread of hope. "Prepare the knights. We force our way out." But Subutai had anticipated this desperate move, a testament to his strategic foresight. The gap was intentional, a carefully constructed corridor disguised as weakness, designed to lure them into a trap. The moment the Hungarian knights began to push toward the opening, unseen Mongol units shifted like shadows, quietly positioning themselves for the next phase of the attack, setting the stage for a final, decisive blow. Meanwhile, Martin and Dean struggled to protect the soldiers around them, their efforts focused on survival. The dust burned their eyes, obscuring their vision. The noise disoriented even the veterans grown hardened to it over many years of conflict. Yet Martin kept his voice steady, calling out formations, rallying stragglers, providing a beacon of hope in the chaos. Dean, though exhausted and terrified, followed every command, his loyalty unwavering. "We're being pushed back toward the river," he warned, his voice tight with fear. "That is where they want us," Martin said, his gaze unwavering. "We must stay near the center. If we fall toward the riverbank, they will cut us down, slaughtering us like cattle." But staying in the center was becoming increasingly impossible, a fading hope. The Mongol circle tightened further with every passing minute, squeezing the life out of the Hungarian army. Smoke rose from burning tents, painting the sky a fiery orange. Lifeless bodies formed grim patterns across the trampled grass, a macabre tapestry of death. Then came the moment no one had expected, a new level of horror. The Mongols opened fire with incendiary arrows, setting the battlefield ablaze. Trails of flame streaked through the air, landing among the wagons, igniting the chaos. Canvas tents erupted into fire, turning into infernos. Supplies ignited, fueling the blaze. Horses screamed in terror, adding a new layer of horror to the battlefield, a cacophony of despair. "The camp is burning," Deans cried, his voice filled with panic. "Keep your head low," Martin ordered, his voice firm despite the carnage. "The flames are part of their pattern. They want to blind us, to disorient us, to break our will." Despite the carnage, the Hungarians were not yet defeated, their spirit not yet entirely broken. Their numbers still held weight. Their numbers still commanded a level of respect. Their courage had not completely collapsed, although it wavered, and Bela's knights were preparing for one last, desperate attempt to break the encirclement, a final gamble. But as the fire spread and the Mongols pressed closer, tightening their grip, Subutai gave the signal for the phase that would irrevocably change the fate of the entire battle, a moment of ultimate decision. A second encirclement, tighter, deadlier, more inescapable, began to form inside the first, a double-layered doom. The moon had begun its slow ascent over the marshlands of the Seijo River, casting a pale, ethereal light across the trampled grass and scattered shields, illuminating the scene of devastation. Smoke drifted like thin ghosts between the remnants of trees, and distant cries echoed from places where Hungarian soldiers still resisted or fled. Pockets of defiance amidst the overwhelming defeat. Amid this fractured landscape, Master Rogerius continued his careful steps, moving between fallen warriors with a reverence that felt almost priestly, a somber duty. Each body he passed told a story, some of fear, some of bravery, many a tragic blend of both. He had prepared himself for chaos, a concept he was familiar with from his experiences. But nothing could have readied him for the eerie stillness that followed the storm of war, a chilling silence more unsettling than any battle cry. Somewhere beyond the trees, his keen eyes noticed a faint flicker. Firelight, small but steady, a beacon in the darkness. It wasn't Mongol fire. Their flames roared like furnaces, consuming everything in their path. This one trembled softly, almost hesitant, cautious. He crouched low and moved toward it, his movements stealthy and deliberate. When he drew close, he saw two Hungarian soldiers, barely more than boys, huddled beside the fire, their faces gaunt and grimy. They were painstakingly binding each other's wounds with strips torn from their own tunics, their movements slow and deliberate, conserving what little energy they had. They both froze when they saw him, their hands instinctively reaching for their daggers, a primal reaction. Rogerius raised his hands slowly, a gesture of peace. "I am no enemy," he whispered, his voice soft and reassuring. "What remains of your unit?" One of the boys, his face streaked with soot and grime, shook his head, his eyes vacant. "We don't know. Were you at the bridge? The fire, the smoke, men falling into the river." His voice cracked, choked with emotion, as though the memory itself strangled him, the trauma still fresh. Rogerius knelt at their side, his movements gentle, and inspected their wounds. "You must move before the Mongols sweep this area," he said with urgency. He looked into their terrified eyes and understood that what held them captive was not only physical injury. It was the crushing weight of everything they had just witnessed, the horror seared into their memories. "They came from everywhere," the second boy murmured, his voice barely audible. "Even after we retreated from a bridge, they were already around us, as if they had anticipated our movements before we made them." Rogerius nodded, his expression somber. The Mongols did not merely fight. They predicted, anticipating their enemies' actions. They read the land, the wind, the subtle patterns of confusion among their enemies, a skill honed over centuries of warfare. And today at Mohi, they had read perfectly, executing their plan flawlessly. A rustle in the undergrowth interrupted the quiet conversation, a sudden noise that jolted them to attention. Rogerius turned sharply, ready to flee if needed. But instead, he saw a group of soldiers escorting a figure whose armor, though battered and worn, still bore the unmistakable mark of high command. It was Deans, the Palatine of Hungary. His once polished breastplate was dented and scarred, one side stained by a long smear of dried blood, a testament to ferocity of the fighting. Yet he walked with steady purpose, his movements deliberate and resolute. "Master Rogerius," Dean said, recognizing him through the shadows, his voice a welcome sound. "I feared you had perished with the others. I survived by God's mercy and by the chaos of the field," Rogerius replied, his gaze unwavering. "What of the king? What of the remaining forces?" Dean shook his head slowly, his expression grim. "The king escaped the encirclement. Barely. As for the others, the field is lost, but not all are dead." His gaze drifted to the two wounded boys, and his hardened expression softened, a flicker of compassion. "We must gather what survivors we can." Behind him, more Hungarian soldiers emerged from the shadows, tired, wounded, and carrying the crushing weight of defeat on their shoulders, their spirits broken. Some supported each other, limping forward with grim determination, clinging to each other for support. Others held broken weapons, their grip tight, as if unwilling to release the last fragments of their pride, their last symbol of resistance. It was a small group, a mere fraction of the once mighty army, but was enough to remind Rogerius that the kingdom had not completely fallen, that hope still flickered. As they moved deeper into the darkening forest, the soft glow of distant torches began to shimmer between the trunks, a potential threat. Everyone froze, their senses on high alert. Mongols did not move quietly. Their horses usually thundered like approaching storms, announcing their presence. But these footsteps were measured, deliberate, their origin unclear. Dean signaled for silence, his hand raised. From the shadows emerged not Mongols, but villagers, men and women carrying meager bundles, their worldly possessions, children clinging to their sides, their faces pale and drawn. Their faces were gaunt, hollowed by fear and exhaustion, and when they saw the Hungarian soldiers, relief mingled with despair, a complex emotion. A village elder stepped forward, his movement stiff. "The Mongols burned our homes," he said in a strained whisper, his voice trembling with anger and grief. "What remains of our people fled here, seeking refuge. Can you protect us?" Deans closed his eyes for a moment, his face etched with weariness, and Rogerius could almost hear the weight of leadership settling on him like a crushing stone, the immense responsibility of his position. "We cannot fight them here," the Palatine said gently, his voice firm but compassionate. "Not now, but we can guide you westward, away from the destruction. If we move by night, we may slip past their scouts, evading detection." The villagers nodded, their faces illuminated by a flicker of hope. clinging to any promise of safety that was offered. They continued moving to the forest, their movements slow and deliberate. Rogerius helping a young mother support her trembling child, offering what comfort he could. Every few minutes, distant sounds, the rhythmic thud of horse hooves, shouted commands in unfamiliar tongues, reminded them that the Mongols were still hunting, still tightening their grip on their hard-won victory. But for now, the forest protected them, offering a temporary sanctuary. When they reached a clearing, Rogerius looked up at the sky, seeking guidance. Clouds drifted across the moon, momentarily obscuring its light, leaving patches of shifting silver across the landscape. The air smelled of ash and damp earth, a somber blend of destruction and life. Somewhere far behind them lay the battlefield, a place where courage and terror had collided, a scene of carnage, where the kingdom had nearly been torn apart in a single day, a wound that would take years to heal. Deans gathered the survivors around him, his presence a source of strength. "This is not the end," he said, his voice low but firm, a beacon of hope in the darkness. "Tonight we retreat, we evade. Tomorrow we rebuild, we regroup, we remember. The kingdom still lives, as long as we do, as long as we carry its spirit within us." His words settled over the group like a thin blanket, too fragile to warm them fully, but enough to keep despair from swallowing them whole, a small comfort. As they prepared to continue their westward journey, Rogerius sensed something, an unease, a subtle shift in the wind. He turned toward the direction of the river, where faint red glows still pulsed against the horizon, a malevolent presence. The Mongols were burning the camps, clearing the field, finishing their grim work with methodical efficiency. But something else lingered in that red glow, something Rogerius could not yet name, an unknown threat, a feeling that the worst had not yet come, that the suffering was far from over. He tightened his cloak around his shoulders and stepped forward, following the Palatine and survivors into the dark forest path that stretched toward an uncertain dawn, their fate hanging in the balance. The night wore on with agonizing slowness as the survivors moved westward through the dense forest, their movements a testament to exhaustion, yet fueled by the primal instinct to live, their resolve unbroken. Master Rogerius walked among them, whispering soft encouragements, helping the weary keep pace, offering support to those who faltered. The wind carried the faint rhythmic thud of hooves from far behind, like a distant drum reminding them that defeat was not the end, for the Mongols hunted long after the last sword had clashed, their pursuit relentless. As dawn approached, the trees began to thin, and a pale band of light spread across the horizon, revealing a wide valley stretched out before them. Smoke hovered there like a low-hanging cloud, obscuring the view, and Rogerius immediately felt his stomach tighten, a premonition of what lay ahead. It was not the smoke of distant battle. This was the smoke of homes burned deliberately, methodically, a scorched earth policy. The group halted on a ridge overlooking the valley below, their movements ceasing abruptly. Scattered farms lay in ruins, their former beauty now desecrated. Wooden beams smoldered, blackened by fire, the remnants of what once were homes. Livestock wandered with slow, uncertain steps, searching for owners who would never return, their cries mournful. The devastation stretched farther than the eye could see, a landscape of despair. A murmur rippled to the villagers following the soldiers, their reaction a mixture of shock and sorrow. Some wept silently, tears streaming down their faces, while others simply stared, their eyes vacant with grief. Deans, the Palatine, clenched his jaw, as if to anchor himself, to maintain control of his emotions. "We cannot go through the valley," he said, his voice firm despite the weight of the scene before them. "If the Mongols swept through here, they may still be nearby, lying in wait." One of the villagers stepped forward, her movements hesitant. An older woman who had remained silent throughout the night's long march, her strength seemingly exhausted. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of sorrow, the burden of her loss. "My son lived down there," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, let me see what remains. Let me say goodbye." Deans hesitated, his face etched with conflict, torn between a need for caution and compassion. Rogerius placed a hand on his arm, his touch gentle but firm. "Let her go. It may bring closure, some semblance of peace." The Palatine nodded, his expression somber, and two soldiers escorted the woman down the slope, while the others waited in silence, their hearts heavy with sorrow. The silence grew heavy and oppressive, broken only by the occasional groan of collapsing beams as the fire finished its destructive work, consuming everything in its path. When the soldiers returned, their faces were pale, their eyes downcast. The woman did not come back with them, her decision made. She chose to stay. One of them said quietly, their words somber. They did not need to explain further. Their meaning understood. The group resumed its westward march in grim quiet, their spirits subdued, avoiding the valley by following the tree line, seeking cover. The sun slowly rose higher in the sky, revealing the scars of war carved across the land, the legacy of destruction. Rogerius felt the weight of these sights settling deep within him, knowing that he would one day have to record them, to bear witness to suffering. Because if no one remembered, if the lessons were forgotten, the suffering would be repeated, destined to continue. By midday, they reached a river, their progress slow and weary. It was narrower than the Seijo, its waters calmer, glistening like glass beneath the sunlight, reflecting the sky above. But at the riverbank lay unmistakable signs of hurried departure, abandoned baskets, torn cloaks, a cooking pot spilled onto the mud, all discarded in haste. The river told a silent story without words. Someone had tried to cross here, fleeing in desperation, driven by fear. Deans examined the footprints on the muddy bank, his gaze intent. "A family," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Perhaps two. They crossed last night, their movements frantic." Rogerius looked upstream, his eyes scanning the horizon. "If they survive the current, they may be ahead of us, their escape successful." A young soldier, his face thin from fear and lack of sleep, stepped closer, his movements hesitant. "Should we follow them and pursue their trail?" Dean shook his head, his expression resolute. "No, we keep moving toward." Here is the translation and rewriting of the provided text, tailored to the requested style. The Royal Road. We must warn the western towns. They still believe the kingdom stands firm. The thought cut like a shard of glass. The kingdom did stand, but barely, a fractured entity scattered like debris across the woodlands. For a while, they traced the river's edge until its course veered westward, charting their path. As the afternoon sun radiated warmth, Rogerius perceived a subtle lessening of the ever-present tension that gripped the villagers. Children, who had been quivering with fear, now exchanged hushed whispers. It wasn't hope exactly, not yet, but rather the tentative, fragile intake of breath after a near-drowning experience. Even so, Rogerius sensed a looming shadow in the distance. The Mongol advance would not cease at Mohi. Their triumph had been too absolute, their momentum too irresistible. And Hungary, still staggering from the blow, would inevitably confront further horrors. As they entered another dense patch of forest, a sudden rustling shattered the quiet, sending a jolt of alarm through the group. Soldiers instantly raised their spears, prepared for a threat. The villagers froze, paralyzed by fear. Emerging from behind a thicket of bushes, a solitary figure stumbled into view, a soldier clad in tattered armor, his left arm dangling uselessly at his side. His tunic was marred by patches of dried blood, a testament to recent combat. He collapsed to his knees before them, utterly spent. Deans hurried to his side, kneeling beside him. "Who are you? What unit do you belong to?" The man gasped, struggling for air. We were part of the king's personal escort. A Mongol detachment ambushed us near the river bend. "Please, you must warn the king immediately. They are planning. They are dividing their forces. Some are relentlessly pursuing him, while others are sweeping west, spreading destruction." Rogerius felt the chilling impact of this warning, as if a cold wind had swept through his very bones. The soldier continued, his voice barely audible. "Their objective is the towns, the monasteries. They seek to obliterate everything that remains of our strength before we can even begin to regroup and mount a defense." His voice cracked with exhaustion and despair. "We fought to delay them, to buy time, but they were simply too numerous, too powerful." He pitched forward, and Rogerius gently caught him, preventing a harsh fall. The man's breathing grew shallow, then faded away altogether, leaving a silence that felt even heavier and more oppressive than the surrounding forest. Deans lowered his head in somber acknowledgement. Then we must reach the king before they do, no matter the cost. The kingdom must not be allowed to crumble completely. With renewed determination, the survivors pressed westward. The crushing weight of dread still bore down on them, but a clear sense of purpose now lent strength to their steps. As sunset approached, they arrived at an ancient stone crossroads, its central marker partially toppled by time, but still discernible. One path wound its way toward the mountains, the other led directly toward the royal fortress. Deans carefully studied the weathered signs, then turned to Rogerius for his judgment. You know these lands and their hidden paths better than anyone, he said. Which road offers us the best chance of evading the Mongol patrols that surely crisscross the land? Rogerius scanned the horizon. In the east, clouds gathered like a dark, bruised echo of the carnage at Mohi. He took a deep, steadying breath. The mountain path, he declared. It is undoubtedly longer and more arduous, but they will anticipate survivors opting for the most direct route. If we navigate the treacherous passes, we stand a better chance of reaching the king unseen and delivering our vital warning safely. Deans nodded in agreement. Then we climb. The group began their ascent as twilight descended, casting long shadows across the landscape. The air grew cooler, carrying the crisp, clean scent of pine and ancient stone. Rogerius glanced back once toward the east, where the sky still glowed faintly red, the dying embers of Mohi's devastation still burning on the horizon. He couldn't foresee what awaited them beyond the looming mountains. Perhaps safety, perhaps yet another devastating storm. But one truth resonated within him with unwavering clarity. History would only remember this cataclysmic day if survivors like them carried its memory forward, preserving the flame of hope. He tightened his cloak against a growing chill and continued his relentless climb, step by measured step, guiding the living away from the smoldering ashes of the past and toward a fragile, uncertain future that lay shrouded in the mists ahead.